Hey there, Dango Stu here. In today's video, I'm going to add a USB charge socket to my Royal Enfield Himalayan. This is a pretty complete kit already. It came with a fuse holder, fuse, ring terminals, the light, so it should be pretty straightforward. The only thing I want to look at is I do want to add some LED lights to the front of this bike for touring, and I don't want to be running two lots of wires back to the battery and really overcrowding those battery terminals. So I'm going to have a look if I can maybe just run a fused set of wires somewhere towards the front of the bike, have a junction point there, then have the USB socket come off that junction point, and then my lights come off that junction point down the track. Start with, I'm just going to take the seat off and then the side panel here where the battery is. Getting this seat off is obviously straightforward with the key. The battery terminals are pretty accessible straight from under the seat, so I might actually take this side panel off at all. But I am going to take the tank off so I can figure out a way to route the wires forward. So just a couple of 10mm fasteners holding this tank on. Around here, I'm just going to turn this fuel valve off, and then we'll disconnect this fuel line down to the carburetor. Okay. Once it's lifted up a bit, I'm just going to disconnect the wires for the fuel sender, for the fuel gauge. So this is our overflow drain hose and the fuel sender wires. Looks like we've got a throttle cable coming down this right-hand side of the chassis. Then the bulk of the wiring here is on the left. So I'm going to run up the left with these wires too, just to keep them all grouped together. Looks like there's a bit of a shroud here with some electrical connectors in this space of the frame. So that looks like a perfect spot to try and put this junction point. I thought I actually had a little junction box sitting in my electrical spares, and I don't. But that's okay. So for now, I'm going to run the wire past that point, and then down the track it'll be really easy just to cut it, put some ring terminals on, and expand it from there. So for now, we'll just go with a straight install from the battery. I'll give you a closer look at this. Essentially, it's a rubberized case, so it's quite waterproof, and also a rubberized waterproof fuse holder, so pretty good for a motorbike. I can't recall exactly where I got this from at the moment, but I'll look it up and I'll put a link in the description for you. Like most of the jobs I've done on this bike so far, they've been pretty simple DIY jobs, so all we really need to do is attach a positive negative and cable tie it up. So definitely something you can do yourself. The first thing I think I'm really going to decide is where I want to mount this. I saw a photo, I think it was someone from the Australian Himalayan Riders group, who had a couple of USB sockets just up here on the plastic underneath the dials, and I think that's a really good spot for it. They had drilled through the plastic and used a cable tie, which I think is a great solution. The plastic can be taken off easily to drill, install it, put it back. So I think I'm going to put it in the same location. This USB charger also came with a double-sided mounting block. I'm actually going to try this first. If it works, great. If it doesn't, I'll clean it off and drill through. So here's the spot I'm talking about under the gauges. So I'm going to peel the back off and just stick this mounting block here. And that's what it looks like on there, stuck on. Because the plug itself's quite big, I'm going to clip the plug in here and then run the other end through the bike. And then there's the socket installed. I've got the socket installed with the cable coming off to the left-hand side, because that's where I'm going to run the wires. My option from here is to come straight down and cable tie onto these wires, or maybe even come through this guard here that's protecting all the handlebar controls. I think I'll go straight down, now I think about it, because the handlebars move, whereas this section stays solid to the frame, so I can actually cable tie it quite tight, and I won't need to leave any slack for movement in the handlebars. With this mounted here, this wire comes straight down, and when it comes down here, it meets some wires here that head towards the battery. These have a cable tie on them already, which cable ties them to the frame here, so I'm going to put a tie around the whole lot there. I'm going to cut this original cable tie off and just have a single one holding them all. Obviously, when you're cutting cable ties off, the important thing is not to nick the wires that's around. Alright, new one in. So through the frame, around the original two wires, and around the USB wires. So here's our USB wire now, and for the rest of its journey, this OEM wire is cable tied to the frame that has these clips into the frame. So I'm just going to cable tie to that wire. and then we'll head across here to the battery terminals. Here's where we're at now. I've got it coming down the side here, so quite close to the front of the bike. And then this is where I've kept all the slack in the cable. The cable currently is just long enough to reach the battery here, and I've put all the slack up in this space here, and that'll prepare me for putting that junction box in when I install the LEDs at the front. There were a couple of cable ties holding these together, so I took that one off once again and replaced it so the third wire could go in. Then everywhere else, I've just used these small cable ties to cable tie it to the wiring loom. Then we'll just grab a little 10mm socket and we'll take these battery terminals off. Disconnecting the negative first. That one off. And then we'll get the positive off. Okay, so I'm going to put this terminal on the top. So simply through the ring terminal for the new USB charger, then back on the positive. It's actually a little bit tight for room here, unfortunately. Alright, maybe taking this side cover off will give us a bit more room to pull that cover out, so I'll have a look. This side cover's a 4mm Allen key. Alright, it doesn't gain us much, but one thing I did realise is you only need to take out these 3 Allen fasteners. The other one's actually a bit of a dummy one, just with a nut on the end, and this bottom here is just a pin that pushes in. So obviously we could take the rack here holding the battery, pull that out, but I don't think I'll do that. I think what I will try though is just to grab the cover for the positive and see if we can just pull that out of the way. Then we can pull it down, which should make it easier to reassemble. Then I'll drag it back through. Alright, that did actually make it much easier. I can position this really nicely, get our positive terminal on here, and the bolt's long enough to pick up that nut again, I hope. Otherwise we might need to get a screwdriver underneath. No, it seems to have grabbed it. So I'll tighten this one up, we'll do the negative, and then put it all back together. Now I know it's all going to work, I'm just going to put a little dab of Loctite on the bolt, just to make sure it doesn't come loose and suddenly we have weird starting problems or whatever. Once it's nipped up, just going to give it a little bit of an extra turn just to snug it up, and then I'll let the Loctite do its job. It was a little bit fiddly to get the cover for the positive back on, but it's done. Now the positive's all covered up and squared away, I'll put the negative back on. Once again, just a little double Loctite. And then we'll just snug that one up too. Looks like there's a little space on top of the battery here where the fuse holder can live quite comfortably. Also nice and easy to get to should that fuse blow. Now I'm just going to put one last cable tie. And we'll put it back together. I'll pop the fuel tank back on first. The rubber vibration mounts here had a couple of washers that go on the bottom, so make sure they're back in place if they dropped off. First thing I do is just feed the overflow back down. Then I'll just clip the fuel sender back in. Then the front of the fuel tank slots into these 2 rubber knobs at the front. And those 2 washers I was talking about. Alright, these 10mm fasteners in. Because these are rubber mounted, they don't need to be particularly tight. You don't want to compress the rubber completely. So just get those snug. Now I'm just going to reconnect that fuel line. Battery side panel on. This pin I was talking about just pushes into a little rubber bushing here. And then just 3 Allen bolts. Then finally, front seat gets under, and the back seat locks everything down, and we're done. So for a final test, just got this plugged in, and you can see there, it's charging at the top, so it's working. Alright, well thanks for watching. Hope this video helps you if you want to install a USB socket on your Himalayan. The only thing I'd really say to be aware of is that